Going to go through this Edelbrock model 1405 carburetor real quick. You'll find that number stamped in the right front carburetor base plate location. These are pretty straightforward carburetor to deal with. I'm not really going to go into the fundamentals of tuning. This is more just take it apart and put it together. So before you start, first thing you want to look at is where all of our bolts are at and everything else. You want to look and find like your accelerator pump lever here and look at the linkages for that and how they all are routed. Same thing for back here when I'm looking at the choke butterfly counterweight and the linkage that goes between the choke rod and the counterweight. Just kind of familiarize yourself with all of that stuff. Very first thing I'm going to do is start with the choke counterweight lever and get that out of there. Now it's very difficult to see, but right here on the back side I've got a little clip. I'm going to use a pick like this, and I'm going to capture that clip by pulling the pick up with the clip on it, and my finger, I've actually stuck the edge of the pick slightly into the skin there to help hold that and keep it from flying off. So I've got that out of the way. I can now take this lever, this linkage rod off, and I'm going to rotate it down so that the key in the rod aligns with the keyway and the counterweight, and then pull the rod out. Set that to the side. I'm pretty big on doing things like, all right, I just pulled that little clip out. I'm going to put that little clip back on the rod because that just makes it a little harder for me to lose it. And it also lets me know exactly where that goes. I'm going to do something similar up here. If I wanted to, I could pull a clip off of this rod going to the accelerator pump lever, but I'm actually just going to take this screw out of the accelerator pump lever. Now, for that I need a relatively large flat blade screwdriver. Get in there, and there we go. We'll start turning that guy out. Now what you need to notice here is that the screw has a shoulder on it. Okay, and now I'm going to remove the lever from this S rod or S linkage, and then I can take my lever and my rod and slide it out down here out of the bottom of my linkage. Okay, the shoulder has to go through the lever. It's easy when you're reassembling to catch the shoulder on the lever, and then the lever won't turn, and just be aware of that. All right, so I've got this little S linkage right here that goes into my accelerator pump. I'm going to pull that out, put it over here, set it to the side with the rest of my lever assembly. Okay, Torx bits. I'm going to need Torx 15 here and here for my main needles, and Torx 25 for all of my top plate, choke housing, retaining bolts. So I'm going to start here with the 15. And you'll notice that this little cover right here, the retainer, is lifting up. And that tells you there's a spring under there. So you're going to want to make sure that you control that so you don't have stuff flying all over the place. All right. Now I've got the cover and that Torx 15, set them to the side. I'm pulling my barrel and my needle out. I'm going to set them right next to that. And there's the spring, which goes down inside the barrel like that. Okay. Again, I'm just kind of putting things where they belong as I go. There's nothing else in here. I'm going to do exactly the same thing here, and then I'm going to go ahead and remove all the rest of these. I'm going to pause it right there because you don't really want to watch me work while I do that. Got all the screws out of there, and I kind of laid them out so that you can generally see where they go. So here's my choke rod and the 2 screws that would go behind it, which are here and here. And I just kind of lay everything out like that on almost any carburetor I do, just because it makes it easier to go back together with it. And I've probably rebuilt 1 or 2 of these carburetors in the past, but still, if you're not comfortable with building a carburetor, you've never done it before, I might recommend that you sit on the floor. Because if you sit on the floor and build it, then if you drop something, it has a lot less distance to fall. You're going to find it easier. You'll be able to keep track of things better. So everything's ready to go, and I can pull my top plate off. And as I'm doing so, I want to capture the gasket that's attached to the top plate and try and get it off there without damaging it. Okay, so here's the top plate, and you can see now that I've got my floats are attached to it, which means that my inlet valves are also attached to that top plate. I don't do anything with removing the choke or any of that for standard type cleanup like this. There's really no reason to. I can just leave that on. So I'm going to take that, set it to the side, and for now I'm going to focus on the bottom of the carburetor. This is my accelerator pump diaphragm and lever, and so I'm going to pull that out. There's a return spring for that. I'm going to get that out of there, and I'm going to take that, set it like that. Okay, now right here I've got my primary boost Venturis and my secondary boost Venturis. I'm going to start by taking my primary boost Venturis out. Those are also a T25 or Torx 25. And one thing to note on these primary boost Venturis, when you remove that bolt, that is the longest bolt or screw they're going to see in this carburetor. All right, these are the screws for the top plate right here, and then that longer one is for the boost Venturi. Don't mix them up. Make sure that you put the long one back in with the boost Venturi, the short ones back in the top, even though they're both Torx 25. All right, so a couple of screws, unthread that guy. There's my boost Venturi. There's the gasket that goes on it. The gasket can only go on one way. All right, it's got that little relief right here. That relief goes around this pickup right here. So they can only go on one way and work. I'm going to go ahead and take that boost Venturi, set it to the side. That's the primary. Let's go back here to the secondary boost Venturi. Pretty exciting watching somebody unscrew screws, isn't it? All right, secondary boost Venturi. Secondary boost Venturi also has a gasket that can only be installed one way. And you'll know it's installed properly because the wide part of the gasket here is going to go out into this opening over here. It won't actually install against this inside. So there's the secondary boost Venturi. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause this and take the other side apart. Okay, so just like the primary boost Venturi, the secondary boost Venturi retaining screws are longer than the retaining screws for the top. They are the same length for all of the Venturis, so you can mix them up here, just don't mix them up from here to here. Now I'm going to take the accelerator pump squirter off. If you've had a carburetor that's been sitting for a long time, this is an area that a lot of time you'll get a lot of varnish in, and when you get the varnish in, the accelerator pump doesn't work properly. Without a functional accelerator pump, you're going to find that the vehicle just really, it wants to fall on its face when you hit the gas. So that tip in, it just goes blah, does nothing, because what this does is it sprays fuel out these nozzles into my primary Venturi. And it's that additional fuel spray that helps it to accelerate cleanly without going lean. These screws right here, Torx 15. So we can take that, set it to the side, and now I'm going to take my finger like this. I'm going to turn the carburetor up, and I'm going to pull my secondary valve and counterweight out. It's the air valve. And now I'm going to take the carburetor and turn it over. And when I do, I should have two pieces that come out of there, a weight and a check ball. And the check ball didn't come out. That tells me it's stuck in there. And that's going to be exactly what you get with varnish. All right. I smacked that a couple of times. There's the check ball. So you can see right there that when we've got a little bit of varnish buildup in here, it kind of glues things together. And if that check ball is glued in place, that accelerator pump discharge nozzle isn't going to work. And that's exactly why I'm going through this carburetor. This carburetor has sat for about 4 years without running, and put it on the vehicle, started it up, and it just went bleh, fell all over itself, wouldn't go, wouldn't accelerate. And you know immediately in that situation with a carburetor that's set, you better be taking a look at that check valve and see if it's glued in there with varnish. All right, going to stop there for just a second. So I went through and kind of cleaned things up, a little choke and throttle body cleaner, and just used the straw here, and using the straw, blow through or, you know, spray some cleaner into each one of your passages. Pay attention again to the accelerator pump here. The accelerator pump diaphragm goes over here, and there's a passage that goes between here and here. You want to make sure that that's clean and clear. Everything else looks pretty good on this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and start reassembling in the reverse order. Now, when you put the accelerator pump together, here's a really common mistake I see. People will put the weight in first, and you don't want to put the weight in first. You want to put the check ball in first. And that makes sense when you think about it, because if you look down in there, hard to tell from this, but that's a round seat in there. The weight is square. It wouldn't seat on that round seat. So let's put the check ball in, then the weight. Replace my accelerator pump squirter gasket. I'm going to start both those screws by hand. Okay. I went ahead and put new gaskets on my primary. I always start these things by hand. Secondary, remember the gasket, that wide part of the gasket goes towards the middle here. Now, if I were to put this in right now, I'd have to take it apart again. Don't forget your air valve. Okay, make sure that you get that in place correctly, okay, and that it has the ability to move freely. There we go. Secondary. Secondary. All right, and there's the primary. All right, I'm going to pause and tighten all that up. I want to correct a mistake or something that I said earlier that wasn't correct. These are not T15. These are T20. So that's a Torx 20. The 25 is too big, and the T20 is perfect. I said T15, and so that was a mistake that I made. I've got everything back together here. Now, on my needle adjustment, I actually pulled those out and cleaned them up earlier, but let me show you the process. When I start with these, I always just take the adjuster needle or the idle adjustment and I turn that in, counting the number of turns. So there's a half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.25. So this one was set really rich here, okay? And this one was closed, which was kind of interesting. We really want these to be set so that they are out about the same amount. And usually you're safe to start with 1.5 to 2 turns out, and then you can fine tune your idle by adjusting these in or out. So I'm going to set them both at 1.5. So there's half, 1, 1.5, half, 1, 1.5. Okay, and so that should give me a pretty good baseline for dealing with the tune once the engine is running. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this accelerator pump diaphragm off. Okay, it just pulls off around there, and I'm going to replace it. I'm going to put the spring back in here so that the spring is all the way down in its seat. And then once I've got the diaphragm replaced, that goes back in like that. All right, I'm going to set the bottom aside, and now we're going to come to the top plate. First thing I want to do is lightly tap on my float housing and remove the float rod. Now I can take the float out. Same thing on the other side. Tap on it to where I can grab it. Okay. Float rod out, float. I'm going to take my inlet valve out, and it's got this little neoprene seat, which always goes into the inlet housing. Set those to the side. I'll be replacing all of that. Once the floats are out, then I could take this gasket off. Okay. Big screwdriver. Light pressure. There we go. Pull the inlet out. Okay, there's the inlet. Notice that filter screen. When you put it all back together again, make sure that you put the filter screen back into the inlet, clean it all up, do whatever it is you got to do. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a second. Inlets are in, needle valves in. I'm going to put the gasket back in. This gasket, it doesn't matter which way it installs, it's identical, it's symmetrical to each side. So I'm going to install it, let's install it like that. I say it doesn't really matter. Okay, the tab on the float right here, if I needed to make a float adjustment, this is where I would be bending. I'm going to set the float into place, put the float rod back through, float into place. All right, now each one of your carburetors is going to have a different measurement for your float depth. So you're going to measure the float depth from the bottom of the float to the top of the gasket. And I believe these this carburetor here should be 7/16 of an inch. So if that's the case, just grab you a 7/16 drill bit. That's the easiest way to measure that. And then you measure drop from here to the float. And I don't really remember what that specification is on these. I'll look that up and figure it all out. Okay, this top plate, the choke housing, and the floats, this is all ready to be reinstalled on the base. So I'm going to pause it there for a minute. Your carburetor kit probably came with a little gauge like this. The flow drop on this thing is 15/16 of an inch. So I always just mark that in red, and then I just take the housing and go right to the edge of the float there, and there we go. It's right at 15/16 of an inch. If I needed to make an adjustment, I'd do it right here by bending this lever out or in. All right, now I'm going to put the top back on, and there's nothing real tricky about this. You just want to make sure that when you're putting it all back together again, number one, you get the gasket and you don't catch it on the air filter stud if you haven't taken that off. And then number two, that you guide your accelerator pump through the hole in the top like that. Okay, so I'm ready to reinstall all of the choke housing screws, and I'm going to do that real quick. All together, first thing I want to do is depress my accelerator pump and make sure that it returns cleanly and that it depresses easily without catching. There should be only the resistance of the spring. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my barrel and my needle. I'm going to hold that spring with light pressure. I'm going to set the needle down into its hole or its bore right there, and I'm going to let the whole assembly slide down and in. Give it a little wiggle until the needle is actually feeding into the main jet, okay, without catching. And if it won't feed into the main jet, so it sticks up high like that and it won't go down, you need to stop right there, figure out why. Okay, so there's the needle. Take the plate. Set the plate in place. Screw. This one is the T15. So the Torx bits you need are a 15, a 20, and a 25. There we go. I'm not going to set the other one in just yet. I'll do that here in a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and return to my accelerator pump. And I'm going to show you that right now, this link is not actually in the proper position for this carburetor. But I know from when I set this carburetor up a long time ago, this vehicle wanted a little more fuel. That's where I wanted that at. But normally for a 1405, you'd be in that second to the top hole, not the bottom hole. I'm going to take that lever, turn it, put the rod through there. Okay. Now I'm holding the lever up. I'm going to put this little S-clip into place. Turn it like that. Okay. Push the lever down. As I do, I'm going to start aligning the lever with the threaded hole. And then I'm going to put that shoulder screw back through there, and you could see how it'd be really easy to get that off. This is really the only even halfway tricky part of these carburetors. These carburetors are super basic. Okay, so there we go, and yep. I always really do try to thread those in almost all the way by hand, and I work the lever as I do so just to kind of center things up. Okay, and now we're ready for that. Okay, so the accelerator pump lever is good to go. Operate it, make sure it works smoothly. We look okay there. Now remember, on the choke rod, I put that clip back on there. I'm going to take the clip off. And be real careful not to, there we go. Okay, I've got that keyhole, and I need to align the rod with the keyhole, like that. Turn it into position, like that. Go through the choke. And now the fun part is installing the little clip. So I pull a choke closed to get the rod up as high as I can. Put the clip in the slot, and ooh, didn't quite get it. There we go. Okay, so there's the clip right there. Kind of a pain in the butt to see, but it's in place. All right, so the final piece of the puzzle would be putting the other barrel valve and needle in place, which I'm just going to do after we shut this off. And there you go. That's a lengthy tutorial. But if you're working on a vehicle that's got one of these, it's really a straightforward carburetor. It's not one to be afraid of. There's not a lot of adjustment. There's not a lot of moving parts. So pretty basic. Enjoy yourself. Don't drop anything. And hope your car runs great when it's done.